and welcome to another Wolftime gaming video. Another hobby video for you today. I managed to pick up the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms Dovahkiin Mini a little while ago, and today I'm going to be turning in from this into this. A nice and easy tabletop ready paint scheme. But before we get started, let's get the kettle on. Okay, so to get your mini on the tabletop, the first thing you need to do once you've got him put together is to give him a base coat, and that's done with the Citadel spray from Games Workshop. This allows you to use the contrast paints, or it doesn't allow you to use the contrast paints, but it makes it easier for you. And the first one that I've used in this is the contrast Gulliman Flesh, and covered all the skin areas. So you start off with the legs, moving on to the arms, hands, around the mouth and neck. There are some areas that drop down quite low on his back that show a little bit more of his upper back, so you need to try and cover all those areas. To paint this mini as a whole, I only used 8 paints on top of the spray can, the Wraithbone. So it's a nice and easy, cheap way of painting one of these minis, and he actually looks really good at the end of it. There's no need to go into loads of detail, because when you want to play with these on the tabletop, you're not going to see like minute details on them. Usually with the Games Workshop paints, it is advised to actually water these down, but with the contrast ones I haven't done. I have used it quite sparingly. I've not piled it on like I've done in the past, because I didn't want it to actually pool. The mini is very small sort of scale. He's only like 32mm scale, so you really don't want to be putting too much on there, but you give it a nice coverage. And then what I did was go around the edges as well, just around the edges of the gauntlets and his shoulders, just to make sure we've got that edge like darkened down towards the edges as well. I am a massive fan of Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls and stuff, so I've been looking forward to actually getting this guy for a while and getting some paint on him. The only thing that's really put me off is because he's quite small. I've been painting a lot of the Games Workshop bigger models recently, so because of the size really, and because the game wasn't released, I've avoided him. Now there are minis available now. You can get a few box sets now for the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms. I've decided to go ahead and paint him. The second paint I used was the Contrast Wildwood. This was the first time I actually used this one. I've not used the Wildwood before, and it gives like a light sort of browny colour, drops into the recesses really nicely, and gives you that shading, so you don't actually have to highlight any areas. You can highlight areas on the models if you wanted to, and use other paints to do that with alongside the contrast paints, but you really don't need to, and that's what really helps you get these minis on the tabletop really quickly. You don't need a lot of detail, as I was saying earlier, on these, just to play with them. So to go into a little bit of detail on the actual game itself, essentially you're gathering a group of heroes and followers that you take on adventures inside the Dwemer ruins, the Draugr infested Nord tombs, and through the frozen wilderness. You also control troops and manage their stamina and magicka on the actual tabletop, so it's very similar to the actual game itself, obviously, apart from the fact that you're controlling more than one mini. What I do find interesting about this game is the fact that you've got AI driven enemies, and there's a lot of narrative events apparently that can change the flow of the battles that you're playing, which really sounds interesting. So you can get players to go around the table, they can all essentially team up to take on lots of creatures or adversaries, driven by an advanced AI system essentially that Modifius have actually come up with, and there's loads of different scenarios that you can play through the game, so I'm actually really excited to do this. It sounds like you can actually play the game single player as well, which I do find quite interesting. So the first wave of minis that have actually come out on top of this special edition one that came out last year that you could just buy as a single. You've got a box of 5 Stormcloaks. There's also the Imperial faction as well, which gives you 5 minis. And there's the Bleak Falls Barrow set, which looks quite interesting. So you've got actually quite a few bad guys in there and a couple of heroes as well. It sounds like the game itself will comprise of like 1 to 6 heroes and 3 to 15 troops per side. The first wave is obviously the core box we just mentioned, and those two boxes of the Stormcloaks and the Imperials. They sound quite interesting. And there's loads and loads planned as well in the future for this game. There's loads of stuff, and you think of the realms of Skyrim and the realms of the Elder Scrolls and all the different creatures and characters and races that you can actually pick through from. I expect all this is going to be in the game as well, which will be really, really interesting. Give you loads of different modelling opportunities, loads of different styles of painting as well, which is quite interesting. I mean, with one warband itself, you could paint like 5 or 6 different races of heroes, races of followers as well, giving you lots of different options and lots of different variety on the table as well, which is great. It's better than just seeing all humans, though you can do that if you wanted to and just go with all one race, maybe have a complete race of Caitans. That would be pretty cool, but to mix them is a lot more interesting and does appeal a lot to me. You can see what I've done here is essentially covered all the leather areas, all the anything that would be brown. I've covered in the wildwood, and I think it works quite well. What I did do at this point as well was where it had started to dry a little bit around the chest and on the leather strapping on the chest, I actually went over with the wildwood again on the raised areas of the belts and things just over the chest. And what that did was give it an extra layer and made it darker, which made it stand out a lot more from like his leather jacket or shirt essentially. So it means that you can literally use just the one paint that makes it stand out straight away and makes everything look a little bit different. So the next step was using the base paint Corvus Black, and again another Citadel paint. This time it's not a contrast paint, it's a base paint, so it does give you that sort of matte black sort of finish, but this is quite a light black. It's got almost a bluey grey sort of feel to it. And it works quite nicely on this sort of a mini, and it makes it so it's already looking a little bit like it's highlighted. I don't ever like to use just a matte dark black, because I think you lose a lot of the detailing with this, where this particular paint almost gives you that highlighted areas on the raised areas as well, so you don't necessarily need to do that and need to highlight if you don't want to. So the areas I've covered with this black are essentially all the areas of fur. So I did all around his waist, he's got just dangling down, I've got furs and things, and then around the belt area as well, there's like fur on either side of that. I obviously went inside the between his legs as well, just to darken all that down, because you don't want that showing up as the wraithbone colour anyway. So essentially it was all the bits of fur that I picked out that I could see with this black colour. At the time of recording this as well, you can actually pick up the rule book for free of charge online on the Modiphius website, and what I'll do, I'll link that down below so you can actually get into that. Have a look at how the actual game works and the mechanics of the rule system, and see if it's something that will appeal to you. I think this is a game that's going to definitely pull a lot of people who don't usually do any tabletop gaming in, purely because of that digital gaming aspect. Everyone knows what Skyrim is who plays digital games, really. Even if they're not that much into the game, everyone will know what it is. So it may be able to pull people in from digital gaming onto the tabletop and actually play around the tabletop as well. And because if you've got that AI mechanics as well, you can actually play it on your own. So it might work well as well, even while we're in sort of lockdowns and things like that. While you're on the website as well, check out all the sort of extra bits that you can get. There's lots of little terrain sets and markers and token upgrade sets, so you can actually get, instead of using sort of markers and just random plastic tokens and things like that, you can actually get the 3D tokens and things, which makes it a little bit more immersive. You can also get like Bleak Falls Barrow terrain sets, so you've got all that sort of Elder Scrolls / Skyrim styled sort of rocks and things that you can actually get with it as well. There's all different things you can actually pick up, and it just makes that game a little bit more narrative. makes it a little bit more fully immersive as well. There's also one thing I did see as well is the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms dice set, which print and play. So what you can actually do is print these out at home and essentially cut around the templates and stick it onto the dice that you've already got at home, allowing you to play the game as well. So you don't actually need to go out there and buy any dice or anything, especially right now where people can't actually get out and go and do that. It makes it a lot easier to get into the game and get into the actual the scenarios and things like that and start playing. So the next paint I used and the next colour we went to was silver. To do that I used the Citadel Minis base colour lead belcher, and essentially what I did with this was cover the sword and in his left hand and the dagger in his right. I also did his helmet and any sort of areas that I could pick out. So there's a little area on the belt that's metal, and there's also on his right shoulder pad as well. There's like a metal area there that I'll use the lead belcher on. One of the more difficult areas to paint the silver was the small metal areas just on like just below his belt. He's got two essentially pieces of leather with little dots on. And you could just leave this with the contrast paint. The raised areas do stand out quite a lot. However, they are supposed to be metal, and if you look at any of the artwork, they all do show up as being like a silver metal colour. To do this, you want to go with a really small brush essentially and just touch each area. Don't try and actually paint them, if that makes sense. Just try and touch the colour onto them, and that'll make them stand out enough to for the tabletop anyway. You don't really need to go into any more detail with those. So once all the metal is down, the next step was to essentially highlight that those areas of fur that we painted black earlier, and that was done with a Mechanica standard grey. This is sort of my go-to really for greys. It's quite a dark grey, and it just gives it that first sort of layer of a grey colour just to make it sort of stand out a little bit more. I know I was talking earlier about the Corvus black being quite light in comparison to other black paints, which meant that you don't necessarily need to do that, and you could just leave it with the Corvus black. You don't need to necessarily do it any lighter. But what I did was put the Mechanica standard grey on there just to highlight it. Now to do this I actually used a technique called dry brushing, and that's when you get the paint on the brush and essentially wipe the majority of the paint off onto like a piece of tissue or a palette or anything like that, and so you've just got a small amount on there. So when you actually paint it onto the or brush it onto the actual model itself, it only picks out the raised areas of the fur, which you can see on the Mini there that there are quite a few recessed areas where they stay quite dark. If you go heavy on that, essentially what it would do is make the fur grey, and that's not what we wanted to do. I then picked up my Corvus Black again and started work on the base and just gave it a complete coat and just so it was darkened down the whole base. To highlight that, exactly the same as the with the fur, I actually used Mechanica Standard Grey on the base itself, all around the rocks, and you can see there this dry brushing technique really works well and only picks up the raised areas, leaving all the cracks and crevices and darker areas a much darker colour. To bring that up even more and to highlight it even more and make it stand out from the fur, I didn't want it looking exactly the same. I did the same process again with dry brushing, but this time with Dawnstone, which was a much lighter grey, and I went only very, very lightly just around the edges of the rocks, and you can see there how that does make it stand out a little bit more from the rest of the model. One of the final steps, the final paints I used was Mournfang Brown, and I did this just on the actual tail of the dragon itself. I wanted this to be very different. A lot of the dragons in Skyrim are actually quite a dark colour, quite dark greys and things, but I didn't want to do any more of the blacks and greys on the model because I thought it would all just sort of blend together. I didn't want it to do that. I wanted it to look like a completely separate element from the actual mini itself. So I wanted to go a lot lighter brown, a lot different to the what we'd already used with the contrast wildwood and things. So I didn't want it to blend in. To do this is just literally just a complete coating of Mournfang across the whole of the tail itself, just to give it a complete block of that lighter brown colour. Now we're on to the final step into this whole process, which is essentially coating a few of the areas with Nolan Oil, which is a shade, another Citadel Miniatures colour, which is an ink essentially, or shade colour is what they call it. And what this does is give a very light coating over the model, and it all drops into the recesses in the same way as the contrast does, but this is purely for essentially dropping into the recesses and darkening down any of those areas. And I did that across the whole of the tail. It's a little bit awkward to actually get into the centre parts of the tail, but it works quite well, and you can already see that where that's dropped into some of the recesses on the actual tail. I also covered all the lead belcher areas with this as well, because the lead belcher is quite a bright colour, and what this does is blends it into the rest of the area, the rest of the model itself, and starts to give it that really good effect. Once you've given that a while to dry, that's you done, and that's the final effect of the mini. And you can see he's looking really, really good, and it was quite an easy paint job done in an afternoon with 8 paints on top of the rattle can, as I've said before, and he's done. He's ready for the tabletop. He looks good. What I'd probably do, maybe you would put a little bit of snow on his base. You can pick these technical sort of snows up and things from different places, just on the rocks and things, just to make it, to highlight a few of the areas. Not too much, just a small spattering, but it would just finish it off. But you can use this on the tabletop now, straight on there, and it's better than having just the plain resin. I'm really, really pleased with how he looks. So thanks for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you leave a comment down below on what you think. Subscribe as well to see any future videos from us. And thanks very much again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.